Hi, just want to welcome you. My name is Nathan McGuire. I'm one of the Associate Ministers at Streatham Baptist Church, and I'm going to be facilitating a conversation between two of my colleagues at Streatham Baptist Church. The first is Rachel. Rachel Waitt is my fellow Associate Minister, and also Neil Charlton, who is our youth worker. And today we're going to be discussing and reflecting on a response to the murder of George Floyd in the States, but also the ramifications and the implications that it's had on the global conversation around race in many countries. Just want to say that we do not have all the answers, and this isn't a conversation to list all the actions that we can take part in together, but merely just a conversation as friends and following some of the conversations that we naturally have on a day-to-day basis when we are in the office. We all really do care about this issue quite passionately, and we felt that it'd be quite important to be transparent in some of the conversations that we have together in private. I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who may want to say a couple of words, and then to Neil, and then we will just begin to have an open conversation about this particular issue. I'm going to hand over to Rachel.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for helping to facilitate this conversation. Like you say, it's part of an ongoing conversation that has happened on and off for quite a few years now between myself and Neil. I'm incredibly grateful to him for those conversations, for his patience and his willingness to talk about this stuff with me. And I guess we often have conversations at these times where this really is forefront in the media, and I obviously want to express my anger, my sadness, my lament at facing a week where yet again the death of an innocent man that has been filmed and publicly put around on social media out of deep injustice and evil and sin is dominating our news cycle, and just needing to respond to that and wanting to respond to that.
Thank you, Rachel. And over to you now.
Yeah, similarly, I've obviously found this particular time quite difficult, personal level, but on a family level as well, in the sense that it's impacted us quite significantly. Obviously, my son Gabriel, who's 13, has been very conscious of all these videos that have been flying around in this, modern day. It's not that difficult to have a video pop up on your phone, and so that's brought up a lot of discussion between him and his friends, and myself, obviously, and that's, although he hasn't always had the words to express perhaps at the depth of feeling, but you can definitely sense that something has happened in him engaging in looking at something as horrific as that. So it's affected my family directly in that sense. Also, just on another level, just to reflect on it on a deeper level, I was asked to write an article, and as I said to the person who asked me to do that, it wasn't difficult to write. It was painful to write. I had quite a bit to say, and I probably could have gone a lot further, but the point of it being quite a painful experience to write, just again underlined for myself how much of an impact these things do have. If I didn't stop and pause and maybe had that written reflection, I probably would have absorbed all of that without processing it, if that makes sense. And I'm pretty sure and aware of a number of people around me anyway that are taking quite a lot in, but haven't had the chance or the time to just pause and reflect. They've just kind of taken one social media piece of information and another one and another one and another one. It's kind of builds itself up, and there's not oftentimes to kind of just pause and reflect on all of that information and the horrific nature of it all.
Thank you both for sharing. So obviously we have these conversations quite often in the office, and often when it's not necessarily something we always plan, it's often in response to something, or maybe just discussing ongoing work that we're engaging privately in the office. And sometimes they can be 20, 30 minutes long. Sometimes it's an hour conversation sometimes. Like what are some of the things that you guys in the office actually discuss? What do you discuss when you're in the office? What does that look like? What do you say to each other? Help us understand that.
I think sometimes it usually starts with me going into Neil's office and bringing him some, I guess, something that it's called weird. Okay. Yeah, so it often starts with me coming into Neil's office, asking his perspective on something, which is, which he's often gracious to explore with me. He's been part of a number of people who have really helped me to understand my white privilege, have really helped me to understand how that means that I see the world, how that means that I absorb media, how that means I relate to people. He's helped me to understand and seek to educate myself about Black history, about not only Black history that I've been taught at school, which is really minimal and often quite US centric, but also about UK Black history as well, so that I can understand better the different communities that I am seeking to be a pastor to. We are so blessed to be in a multicultural church, but that comes with a need for us to seek to understand one another. And Neil and others have been part of my process of trying to do that better and processing, particularly when I get that wrong. And there have been numerous times, and there continue to be numerous times, and there will continue to be numerous times where I get that wrong, and I say the wrong thing, or I have the wrong thought, or I just don't check myself. And I want to keep learning and keep getting better and keep coming and repenting and having the humility to seek this as a lifelong journey of deconstructing kind of the way that our society makes us all and forms us in our different groups. And yeah, I'm just really grateful. So that's often how this happens.
Cool, awesome. And Neil, so how the conversations start for you, and how do you engage in them?
Yeah, just as Rachel said, really, it will be a conversation that begins perhaps in a corridor and then goes maybe to the office. And I think for me, I think it's largely down to my personality type that I'm able and willing to have those conversations. Again, I guess I would have to go back into my history but to work out why I prefer to do that. I just like to engage with people. It's been my kind of my experience growing up that I've obviously been in a quite obviously white dominated spaces, and I've been able and willing to kind of engage with others in that space. I think within my own family as well, it's been helpful. My mum and dad brought me up to really embrace other cultures and races. I can use that word quite guardedly because I don't really like that word race because it's a social construct, but we use it because it's what's used. But I think within my family, I was really kind of raised to embrace and to challenge people at times gently, but also just to be open to my own failings as well. That like you said from the beginning, we don't always get things right. We don't have all the answers. I know I don't. But that's my personality. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is because I know that that's not where everyone else is, from my background. For instance, I know that my wife, and she has said over the last few days, there's been a number of people that have wanted to engage with her around this issue of race and understanding it a little bit more. And for her, it is quite a painful thing to begin to express. And so her response is, you need to go out and you need to investigate and you need to do your own research, which is a perfectly valid response to have. But that's very different from mine. And so I'm quite conscious of the fact that I might be a bit of an aberration to most, perhaps. And I think it's okay to accept the fact that there are going to be people who, when they are approached, don't really want to get into that level of conversation, which is a title of a book, Why I Don't Talk to White People About Race, which some of you will, I'm sure, will know about. But it's interesting because within that book, the author, who has that kind of very standoffish title, spends the entire book beginning to explain why all these issues. So it is quite a provocative title, I thought. And I think that's very much me. And I know there's others around me as well that want to really engage with people to help others to see as best as they can from our perspective.
Yes, it's interesting. Like, I was just going to pick up on that because obviously, we make it potentially sound like it's quite easy to have these conversations, and it's not always easy to have these conversations for us as a group, but for others. And I think that's really important that, some people don't want to particularly speak about it and shouldn't have to speak about their lived experience if they choose not to. I guess one of the things that we are quite fortunate as a church is that we've got a staff team, so we were able to have people to talk to about this. What do you find difficult in talking about this issue, about race, about the injustice around race relations or different cultural groups? What are some of the issues that you find quite difficult talking to each other about? And dare I say, is there anything that you try to avoid saying to not offend? So I'll go to you, Neil, first.
There is nothing I will not avoid or will avoid, if that makes sense. Sorry, I'm just my screen back. I like to build relationships first with people before ever going to the level of discussing some quite hard and difficult things. I think it always makes sense to start with a kind of a basis of a friendship or relationship, or at least something before getting into those kind of conversations. Otherwise, it just becomes very kind of cold. And most of the friendships that I've had over the years, I've been able over time just to begin to speak to individuals about some things, and that they may say, that sounds okay, but when I hear them, it doesn't sound okay. And for that moment, I feel like it's important to explain to that individual why what they've said or that their perception might be viewed differently from someone like me. And I think it's just, maybe it's a theological thing in the sense of that how we come together, and scripture does say iron sharpens iron, and that there are things that I am unaware of within myself that my wife makes me aware of, and other people make me aware of. It's a bit like standing in front of a mirror. Sometimes you don't know that you've got breadcrumbs on your mouth, but if somebody else can point that out to you, that's really helpful. And I want to be a type of person who's able to do that. But I think the friendship is the the kind of foundation. But personally, I don't have any kind of barriers or filters in talking about difficult things. I mean, I think I am the kind of guy that will want to go there rather than shy away from it. Did that answer your question?
It does, and I'm going to be a bit going to push the boundary slightly. So, like, I get that, yeah, you don't have any sort of inhibitions. Like, you quite happily sit with the discomfort potentially that may be in a conversation and really go to that place. But you do have some degree of filtering, I guess, because I'm guessing you don't necessarily just kind of regurgitate how you feel. You think it through. You'd kind of potentially use tact. You may even use kind of like a degree of rhetoric as well to kind of tease things out. How do you go about that? Because clearly you haven't scared Rachel off. So you challenged her, but like she's not like, I can't speak to Neil. So she keeps coming back to your office or having conversations with you in the corridor. So what do you do?
Yeah, and again, I think it's related to my personality type. I'm not saying it's all down to that, but and partly to do with my history as well, in having a history of engagement throughout my whole life. Just getting along with people, and when you're getting along with people, you can then speak into their lives. I'll give an example. Recently, I was texting a friend of mine who happens to be a white Jewish lady in North London. I know her from my previous church, and we've stayed in touch. And we were texting, and she had mentioned a few things in relation to the George Floyd situation, and then went on to say one statement, which was, Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. I paused, and then I responded. I think it's good to kind of, rather than quickly react, to just have a moment to just pause and then react. And then after responding, I had basically decided to approach it in a way to explain to her that actually the focus at this moment in time is on Black lives. It's not that we don't love all lives. It's not that we are not concerned about all lives, but it's that we are at this moment in time focused on this particular issue because it's significant and disproportional to all other situations. So I wanted to kind of reinforce and help her to see that in using that kind of statement, it does take away the agency and even the urgency of this particular situation. And in fact, when I did share that all in a text to her, she did reply and said, please forgive me. And I told her that I had already forgiven her before she asked for forgiveness, because she's my sister in Christ. And that's how I operate. And I'm hoping that most Christians would. But I meant that genuinely. I meant it genuinely in the sense that I'm fully aware that there's things within all of us that we don't always see. So to have a go at someone else for not seeing something is, I think, can become almost hypocritical to some level, because there's things within myself that I don't always see. So I always have to bring that back to me, and then have the opportunity to kind of speak and help someone else to kind of see it from my perspective.
Yeah, that's helpful. What about you, Rachel?
I think Neil's right, actually. It is about relationship. I think that's been one of the massive blessings of being at SBC, actually. I've lived in South London for 20 years, and I would have said that, and I've worked alongside Black colleagues in different jobs. And I even had, some friendships, but not to the level that I've had here. And I think the willingness of people from different backgrounds to really get to know one another, to share their lives and share their experiences and hear one another, is something that is really precious and can be transformative if we let it be. So yeah, it's about friendship, it's about respect, mutual respect, and I think sometimes it's about the fact that I will go there, I will ask the thing that might upset in order to get understanding. But I think that Neil knows that I'm seeking understanding. That's where it comes from. So there's not really a lot we haven't talked about, really, which has been very helpful. Yeah.
And can I just say, I've not seen myself in that dynamic as the go-to person. For me, it's an offspring of relationship.
And it's not. I think it's really important that we don't use our Black friends as go-to people. Yep. And that's not the only relationship that we have. And I've got several people. And one thing that's been a massive learning for me in the last kind of year, I think, in this part of the journey, is learning that there's no point in having a Black go-to person, because not all Black people are the same. They don't think the same about things. They come from a whole pile of different perspectives. You know, in our wonderfully diverse context, I've got Black African friends who come from a really different perspective than my Black Caribbean friends. I've got second generation friends, I've got first generation friends. That's a whole different thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm just blessed to have several Black friends that are prepared to talk to me about this stuff, and that is so enriching and so helpful, and I'm so grateful. Yeah, I think there's a real dangers in having a Black go-to person. That's
I hear that. So let's move slightly on to kind of obviously the most recent event that is in the media at the moment. Obviously, George Floyd in Minnesota was murdered by policemen, and obviously this has really again reignited some of the pain that cultural groups, in particular Black people in the States and across the world, experience. What's your thoughts on what's happened in that particular situation? I'll go to you first, Rachel.
I think there's just that sense of, oh, not again, and will this ever change? Somebody shared a video with me with lots of different people saying we will overcome, and then someday, and then at the end it says, you know, well, when is someday? And I think that's kind of, especially as this week's gone on, where I'm at really is, you know, just trying to not feel despair, but to hold on to hope, particularly as a Christian, to hold on to Acts 2 and Revelation 7, and that understanding that the kingdom of God is not going to be like this, and is not meant to be like this, and trying to hold that on through the storm of the emotions of this week. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for sharing. Neil, what about yourself? What's your reflections?
Yeah, similarly, I think what comes to mind is the quote from Saint Augustine, actually, which I might summarize it in my own words, but he basically says that hope has two daughters: anger and courage. Anger for the things that are, and courage to see change of the things that are. And for me, this whole experience of George Floyd, but all the others that came before, because there's been a lot, it is easy to lose hope. It is easy to be disheartened, and particularly as well, working within the space of serious youth violence in the UK as well, and seeing the amount of issues that are related to that. And it can become overwhelming. But I do kind of hold on to that particular quote from St. Augustine, who, by the way, was an African theologian. Just wanted to bring that up.
Good.
That it really gives me hope that things can change. And the other thing that has kind of helped me is recently I was listening to some feedback from a number of long-term, very established activists in America who have been in the game for a very long time. They've seen some very difficult things. And a number of them, if not all of them, were saying that this situation is profoundly different. The response from it is profoundly different in the sense that they were saying that in the earlier days, like we're talking about 30, 40, maybe years ago, it would be largely one group of people making the protest, one group of people trying to bring pressure on the politicians, one group of people doing all the heavy lifting, whereas more recently, and especially under this current situation, there's been quite a number of voices from all types of different backgrounds. Now, I'm not saying this is going to cure everything, but I think it's been interesting to hear from these kind of heavyweight activists who've been in the game for a very long time saying that there's something profoundly different here, and they're hoping to channel it in the right direction, because I think it's easy to be, like any time, can be easy to get caught up in the excitement, if I can use that word, of a current event. But hopefully the amount of voices that are involved in this will hopefully bring something forward. And that's why I have this mixture within me of anger and of courage, a mixture of both, because I think hope has both of those daughters.
Okay. So you both kind of mentioned kind of, I guess, the Christian perspective on this and alluded to either scripture or to theologians in our tradition, in our history. What should the church's response be? We're not just talking about local congregations, we're talking about God's people in essence. What should our response be? Is the first question. And the second is, obviously, issues like this can be quite divisive within the life of God's people. So, you know, the fact that maybe we don't kind of use loads of scriptures in our response might be deemed as you're being too liberal, or you're picking up this kind of social justice agenda, and it should be really about the gospel. So that's an issue that sometimes comes up, but also the issue that, you know, we shouldn't see color. We're all God's children. We're kingdom people. We've been adopted. We shouldn't see color. We shouldn't see that stuff. And actually, you know, the root is sin, but we shouldn't recognize issues around race as an expression of that sin. What's your thoughts on those sort of issues within the life of the church? I'll go to you first, Neil.
I think that it would be unwise to not be aware of people's skin colors. I think it's to not embrace somebody fully, and including their skin color, is almost to see half of them or just a part of them. And I think it's doesn't really kind of fully embrace a person when you're not considering a factor, part of them that is important to them and probably has caused them in the UK context and US context quite a lot of difficulties. So to pretend like it's not there is actually to pretend like a part of that person is not there, which I think is not helpful. Could you remind me what else apart with your question, please?
So I think so you talked about the fact that we should recognize race as a part of people's identity, as it's a social construct that was basically an inheritance of colonialism. But also, I guess, what should the church's response to that be? So I guess part of it is that we should recognise race as something that we need to navigate through. But yeah, what should be the other responses?
Yes, so I think it definitely should be recognised and definitely dwelt on. I think, again, to ignore that is to ignore maybe your own congregation as well. I know that our congregation has, what's the current number? 50
I'm
plus
not sure.
50.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, to ignore that is to ignore kind of half of your church, most of your church. I think that the issues of social justice and racial justice is throughout Scripture. I think in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, and I think once again, to ignore some of those passages is to ignore the gospel of Christ. I wrote in a recent article about how Pentecost is kind of a picture of God trying to share his gospel with many ethnicities who came to the Pentecost festival. And I think God's heart is for all ethnicities, all colours. And when we see injustice, we should, as a church, be willing to engage in it, not ignore, not sidestep the issue, but to, as much as we can, and with as many people as we can, get involved somehow. And I was touched by hearing someone recently who said sometimes churches can be guilty of getting involved at a distance, in a sense that there's many projects and many churches who are involved on a social welfare level, but not often involved on a social justice level. I think the social justice deals with the systemic background, deeper structural issues. And I think I'm not taking away from the fact that churches do a good thing when they do the social welfare, but I think we should be encouraged as churches to go the extra mile. The scripture regarding the Samaritan who helped the poor person who was beat up on the road. And Martin Luther King often reflects on the fact that there's two kind of things to tackle there. There was the initial situation of the person in pain and beat up and left for dead in the street. And so that's social welfare. But then Martin Luther also kind of reflects on the fact that something needs to be done about that road. Something needs to be done about that pathway, that if many people are going down that pathway and getting hurt and getting damaged, which apparently was true, then something needs to be done about the road. And I would encourage churches to not just do the welfare, but somehow get engaged in the social justice as well, which is a big piece of work. But thankfully, there are many, many organizations that are already doing really brilliant things. And so rather than reinventing the wheel, you potentially get involved with others, partnership with others in that work.
Thank you for that. Now, what about you, Rachel?
I mean, I think just echoing to start with what Neil says about there being a biblical imperative to engage with this issue. It is a gospel issue. The gospel, God intended the gospel to be for all nations, right from Genesis 12 and his promise to Abraham all the way through to Revelation 7. It's there, and it was radical at points. In Jesus's ministry, talking to the Samaritan woman, and other examples where he crossed a racial divide and wanted to demonstrate in his ministry that his message, he wasn't just a Messiah for the Jews, is an example to us as well, that this is part of God's heart for his kingdom. I think it's quite interesting to think about. I've become more and more aware that there are different sorts of churches, particularly in the UK. And I've become more and more aware that different churches, depending on their context, probably need to have different responses to this issue. And rather than sit here and tell other churches how to respond, I think I'd like to just spend a moment thinking about how we as a church should respond in our context. So we are really, and I say it often, but I really mean it, we're really blessed to be a multicultural congregation. And that affords us a privilege to be able to be a prophetic body of people in our relationships who demonstrate to the world that racial equality and justice is possible. And I think we need to do that at an organisational level, at a congregational level. We need to do that in our worshipping lives together on a Sunday, and we need to do that in our other 6 day a week lives, in the friendships that we make, in the choices that we make, in the conversations that we have, in the conversations that we challenge from our different perspectives. And so I think, you know, we have a unique opportunity to talk about this in a way where we've got both people at the table, and many more besides, which is not something that a lot of churches have. And I think that's really important. I think we can be a place of dialogue, a place of listening, where what is being shown here can happen in so many different relationships. And it is, that's one of the wonderful things. It is happening. And that's something about courage. I think that we all need courage to do this. But yeah.
Yeah, I think, I agree with both of you. I think it's really interesting that we always have these conversations about the fact that was Jesus political. And it's kind of, you know, we shouldn't be involved in politics or kind of within civic society. And, you know, again, just using the Good Samaritan issue, here you have a Jewish rabbi who had a degree of privilege within the Roman Empire asking questions about this person that's got beaten up. And in essence, it's quite prophetic in just telling the story, being able to speak on the behalf of another, and kind of sharing it in a public space. So there is something just in Jesus doing that. He's actually challenging the status quo, which I think is really important for us to recognize. And again, you know, James Cone in his book quite provocatively says that, you know, Jesus was lynched, in essence, by the state in his attempts to theologically draw parallels between Jesus' experience of being crucified and the Black experience within America, which I think is quite a powerful one. So yeah, I think, you got anything else? No, I think you.
No, I was just, I was kind of thinking about, again, Martin Luther King Jr. and the fact that he did not see a discrepancy between, you know, the calling of Christians, and also to be heavily involved in civic society, or to at least challenge some of those things that were going on in his time. So as a, you know, as a Christian, I don't personally see why you would not want to get involved in certain challenges, or speaking to the truth to power, or challenging individuals within that realm of power as well. I think Martin Luther King and others did that quite well, and I don't think that to stand away from that would, I think it just doesn't make sense in my mind that we can just remain completely unattached from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So obviously, because of time, we'll bring this to close, because this is obviously a huge issue, as are many other issues, and we can talk about this as we normally do for pages. But I'm an individual. I want to respond to what I've seen in the States, but also what's been happening for years. You know, I may have had family members that have been abused by the police, even here in the UK. Right? And we know, for example, that it's not just police killings, doesn't just happen in the States. There's been several police killings in this country. And I've seen the George Floyd murder on TV. How should I respond as a Christian, as a believer, someone who's seeking to follow Jesus? How should I respond in this time? Anyone want to pick that one up?
I do think that there are different responses required depending on whether you're white or black. And so I'm going to talk about what I think my response and the response of people who look like me should be. I think all change, and this is what we want the world to change, we want to see transformation, and all change has got to start with us. And so I think that the first thing that I need to do over and over again is to check myself, is to ask the Lord to reveal to me the places in my heart, in my mind, that still are captive to the sin of racism, and to repent of them, and to keep on taking thoughts captive and repenting of them. And I think that that's the start. And within that comes a humility, a willingness to be wrong, a willingness to have my mind changed by the stories and the friendship and the lived experiences of my black friends, but also by the Spirit of God, as he challenges me to become more like Christ. I think that the next thing that we can do, and maybe sometimes these come hand in hand, I think maybe it's a bit chicken and egg, is to continue to educate myself. And I talked earlier about not having a black go-to person, and I think that Neil's wife is completely right. I've seen it a number of times. Google is free. Google it. And one thing I've done recently on my Facebook timeline, and I could make it more available, is just showcase some of the books that I've read. That some of them have been recommended by Neil, others I found myself through other research. A whole range of different books, some non-fiction, a collection of essays, some wonderful novels that have helped me to educate myself on Black history here and in the US, have helped me to understand some of the sociology around this, helped me to understand white privilege, helped me to understand unconscious bias, and helped me to just hear the voices of those that are not like me. And it is from learn to believe them. I think that it can be really hard for white people to believe it, because it's not how we are brought up to see the world. It's not our experience. I shared an example yesterday with a group of ladies that I was talking to about talking to some black friends and realizing that how they saw the police was really different to how I saw them. When me and my kids see a police officer on the streets, we assume that they are going to be kind and help us, and they're there for our protection. I know that my black friends don't see them like that, and it took me ages to believe that, and it took lots of conversations, and it took me actually seeing it from my own eyes, seeing injustice with my own eyes. And I'm ashamed of that. I am genuinely ashamed of that. But I think that's what is often going on for people, is that it just doesn't match how they see the world, and they find that really hard to get their heads around. And we need to try harder. We need to choose to believe and choose to educate ourselves.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with what Rachel was saying, and in respect to my, black and brown brothers and sisters, I would say to them to take care of themselves. Like I said, maybe in the intro, this has affected people at different levels. and I think it's okay to not always be as immediately vocal as some people are. And so if the different levels of pain have different levels of reaction to that pain. So if it means that you need to just be with one or two others and talk about it, then fine. If you need to have a chat with another person, then fine. If it's taking some time out, then fine. I think it's also shutting yourself off from some social media and information for a period. I think that's also fine. So I think the key is to take care, because there's a lot of internalized trauma, I think, going around when we see a lot of these images and protests as well. It does kind of stimulate a lot. And so it's really important to take care. I would also say, again, when people are ready, they can show some form of solidarity. I think to remain completely silent throughout this whole experience I don't think it would be difficult to. I think what I'm trying to say is that it's really important to show a sense of being together with other people in this situation, whatever means that is. I think it's important to show some level of connection, some level of unity, some level of I'm in this with you, even though I might be in a different country, even though I might just put something on my Facebook or my Twitter account. Some level of solidarity would open conversations, number one, for those who are willing, but I think it's also just a sense of being one with others who are also hurting around the world. So I think that's really important. And like I said, that showing solidarity might open up conversations with others. And like I said before, I know not everybody might be in the space to have those deep and profound conversations, but for those who are, I think it's important as well at a time like this to try to engage with those who are willing, to have those conversations. It's similar in a sense, I guess, not the same, but in the pandemic situation that we're in, I know I have, and I'm sure you two have had opportunities, much more opportunities to speak into people's lives about all kinds of interesting and deep things because of the situation. And so I would say, despite the horrible situation of George Floyd, I think it's a really powerful opportunity to engage in those kind of conversations. And then I think lastly, I would say be open to work or partner with others. There are so many really, really effective charities, Christian and non-Christian charities, that are doing work in seeking to fight racial injustice. And so I would say, if you can plug into any of that, then do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. And I think, again, as I said at the beginning of our time together, that this by no means is a one-stop kind of answer to all. It's really just us being quite open and sharing our own experience, but also our thoughts and reflections on this particular issue of racial injustice that's experienced across the world. As a church, we continue to go on a journey together as a ministerial team, as a leadership team, as a staff team. We're continuing to have conversations about what we do next. And we really do want to invite you into this conversation that we're having at the moment about this issue and other issues as well. So please do watch this space. We will be sending out more information over the next couple of days, over the next week or so, about creating spaces to have these sort of conversations, to be open, to share in a safe way. And that may mean that we create spaces for particular people groups, for them to discuss in a way that they don't feel the fear of offending or potentially upsetting. And also then figuring out what we do as a local Christian community in responding to this issue. Do want to say, because I'm sure some people will be thinking it, is that justice is a huge area, and there are several issues that one can respond to, and in us addressing this isn't demeaning any other issue, but it's recognizing and responding in this moment of the need to create space for individuals to discuss and to seek to make change, not just as a local Christian community, but also further afield in our respective areas. I want to thank Neil and Rachel for being open to share what some of your conversations that you have privately together, sharing this with the wider church and wider Christian community. And just want to encourage you both to continue to be you, to continue to be go on your journey. And yeah, I want to thank everyone. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.